And now allow me to introduce Hallie Crawford, who's joining us today. Hallie is a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert with over 21 years of experience. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. She is regularly featured in the media and has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 1,500 success stories, her team of coaches and resume writers help professionals find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning to go to work. Her website is www.halliecrawford.com, and I'm going to drop that in the chat right now as well, along with a handy handout that Hallie has provided for you all in advance. So without further ado, welcome, Hallie.
Thank you, Andy. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for being here today. We so appreciate it. And my running joke is now that we do help people find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning because they're excited to go to work. But these days, it's then to walk down the hall to go to work. For some of you, you may be still working remotely. Some of you may be in hybrid mode or full-time back to the office. There has been a lot going on with COVID, and we have been trying to support and help people as much as possible because even for those of you who are going back to the office or back to the office full time, we understand and know that it can feel kind of strange. There is research and surveys and studies are showing that for some people, they're really excited about going back to the office. Other people are less so. And for some people going back to the office, it feels kind of like, okay, here I am. It's like, you know, there's this buildup and it's less exciting than they wanted it to be. So we wanted to talk today for Career Month about these coaching skills that we feel leaders need to master and really be good at. Even more so, we feel, because of COVID and this either hybrid work environment, working remotely, etc. These employee engagement, so to speak, kind of skills that we're going to be discussing today are just so much more important for so many different reasons. People are demanding and wanting greater fulfillment and reward in their jobs now more than ever. So we're going to be talking about 5 coaching skills specifically. We have been, as Andy was saying, as part of our intro, we've been coaching and training for just over 22 years now. Our company, my company, is based in Atlanta, Georgia. But I actually lived in Chicago for 8 years right before moving to Atlanta. So I have a special affinity for Chicagoans, et cetera, and for the city. And we have a lot of information on our website. So I did want to let you all know as we dive in today that there is a lot of additional information to help you with your specific situation on our career blog, which is at the very top of our website. There's some free tools there. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn in order to get advice, because we know, like I said, that there's a lot of different scenarios going on out there and people are struggling kind of in different ways, whether it's career transition, working from home, and how to be successful, etc. Here's our basic agenda for today, and Andy's going to be launching our polls for us, which is perfect. We're going to do a very quick definition of coaching and what we mean by that. What do you mean by coaching and how is that different from consulting, etc. We'll talk about 5 critical coaching skills that are very important, especially for leaders. And I'm going to give you a couple of extra bonus tools too. And then we'll also go into some suggested homework. So you all are filling out the poll already, which is fantastic. We are curious kind of the profile of people here today, why you're interested in developing these skills, what your different situation is. And just by the way, too, in addition to receiving a copy of the recording, oops, sorry, I'm trying to copy and paste this. I'll do this later. We are happy to share a copy of our webinar slides today as well. I will put that in the chat as soon as I can figure out how to do that without advancing my slides. I'm pretty good with technology, but every once in a while. So far it looks like with our poll, managing difficult employees and peer relationships is winning out. And then more senior leadership roles is second. And it makes sense that managing peer relationships and maybe some difficult, touchy situations can be up there at the top, because I think we're all on edge at least a little bit. And it's hard to know going back into the office, especially how to deal with, being vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're good, Andy. I'm going to end the poll if that's okay. Not to jump the gun here, but let's share our results here for just a second. So we've got managing peer relationships first, taking on more senior leadership roles second, which again makes perfect sense. I would be curious about what some of the other answers are. So if you all would feel free to just put what some of your reasons are in the chat box, that would be great. Because as we go today, we will be answering questions if we have kind of a critical mass of questions halfway through. And we will have time at the end as well for Q&A too. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And Andy, if you could do the next poll when it's time in a couple minutes, that would be great. All right, so let's talk about effects of working from home. Different people have different reactions to this working remotely thing, the hybrid model, et cetera. What we have found with our clients, which we understand and makes sense, that people just tend to feel, or they have felt, more disconnected from their coworkers, from their organization and the mission and purpose of their organization. They felt disconnected from their coworkers and kind of what's going on with them, because there's either no water cooler talk or there's less so. And with this blurring of work and home, working remotely too, our boundaries are kind of all out of whack. And so it's really important for leaders today to understand more effectively, we would say, how to lead people remotely as well as in person. But as part of this, do a better job of checking in on what our employees or our peers or coworkers needs are. How are they doing? What's going on for them? What's the kind of emotional side of going through all of this? And checking in with that more so than we would have ever in the past, given COVID and everything else. So let's dive into first the definition of coaching and what we mean by coaching. We have always felt very strongly that leaders should be able to wear multiple hats, if you will. They need to be a boss, and they need to, draw the line and set boundaries. Sometimes they need to set priorities. They need to establish connection and communication between their team, etc. And plenty of times as a supervisor and sometimes as a coworker, we need to tell people what they need to do. But in terms of coaching, in an ideal world, the true definition of coaching is less about issuing instructions, not telling someone what to do necessarily. It's more about helping people figure something out maybe on their own, giving them some parameters and showing them a little bit about what they need to do, but letting them figure the rest out. It's also about giving feedback, explaining something in a different way, or giving someone a different perspective. And in some cases, it's about being encouraging and being a little bit of a cheerleader as well. What coaching is and what it isn't is on this next slide. It's a method to provide guidance to other people to help them, again, kind of walk down the right path, if you will, hold them accountable, etc. But it's also about helping people, empowering them to find their own answers, not just, again, telling them what to do. Now, coaching obviously is not therapy, but feelings may come up in some of the conversations that you're having with your coworkers. And we're going to talk about today how to deal with those kinds of things more effectively, because every once in a while, those feelings may need to be addressed. And it's not consulting where you're just telling someone what to do, but sometimes we do need to tell someone what to do and give them our advice and explain something. That's absolutely part of it in some way, shape, or form. So the 5 skills we're going to talk about today are going to be creating a safe space and designing your work relationships more effectively. Active and proactive listening. We're going to talk about this idea of powerful questions, where we're asking people the right questions versus, again, just telling them what to do. How to recognize in a better way other people's strengths and play to those strengths. And finally, developing your own unique leadership skills and your profile of who you are as a leader versus trying to fit yourself into a box of, okay, this is what a leader should do or be. So let's take a look at creating a safe space and designing relationships more effectively. Let's do the second poll here if we could, Andy, that would be great. We want you to think about for just a second, what tends to, in your personal or in your professional life, either way is fine, what makes you willing to be open with someone? You can think of it as being open as in being vulnerable or sharing something with them, or being direct and honest with your feedback, etc. And we've got 3 responses here: trust, empathy, and them being open with me. And then we'll talk about this first tool. Looks like we've got trust winning out so far, which makes sense. Okay, great. It looks like we've got everyone who's responded. So let me end the poll here and share the results. Trust is the biggest one. Them being open with me comes in second, and empathy is 16%, the lowest there. So what I wanted you all to know, just by the way, is that all of the coaching skills that we're going to be talking about today will help you develop a greater sense of trust with your coworkers, with your boss, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so all of these will help you create a quote unquote safer space, more productive work environment, and relationship with others so that you're able to work together and communicate together more effectively. So here's the deal with this first one, designing the relationship. It's about structuring relationships, conversations, or meetings with people, whether it's one-on-one or in groups, in a more proactive, thoughtful, mindful way than we ever have had to do before. We find this is incredibly helpful during COVID, not just because of the work environment, hybrid work situation, or, different schedules that people have, but also because there's just so much else going on in people's lives. And some people are more stressed about COVID, less so, et cetera, et cetera. And having an agreement with people in advance to set kind of the ground rules, if you will, or agreements for that conversation that you're about to have, for the meeting that you're going into, or just that one-on-one relationship to improve it can help enormously. Here are 4 things that we want you to think about first, and then we'll continue with this on the next slide. So one thing to consider in order to develop that greater trust and also establish kind of the guidelines for a conversation or a relationship is, what kinds of things do you need to keep confidential between the two of you versus what are things that you can share? A second thing that you can do is explain your style, your personality type, your strengths, but also maybe your challenges in some cases. As a leader, let people know who you are as a professional. 2 quick examples here. We had a client who was moving into a new role at a new organization and company. She realized that at her old organization, because she is this calm and cool under pressure type of person, that people had started to make an assumption about her that she didn't care as much about deadlines, that she didn't have this sense of urgency around deadlines that might be coming up or looming, or high pressure situations. So in her new job, she took the time right up front to explain to her coworkers as well as her supervisor, I want you to know that I happen to be this really calm and cool under pressure person. But that doesn't mean that I don't care about the deadline or I'm not aware of it. I'm just the kind of person you can come to if you need to talk about something that's urgent and we can figure things out together. I'm able to keep my head on straight, so to speak. Don't hesitate to talk with people in the right way, of course, about what your strengths are, what your style is, what your preferred method of communication is. Let them know what works for you and ask them what works for them. Don't leave it to chance or have it be unclear. Talk about these things. The third thing we want you to consider doing is to be very clear at the beginning of a conversation, especially meetings or even the relationship that you have with someone, what your goals are. Establish those up front so that people understand, okay, what's the purpose of our meeting today? What's the purpose of having our conversation? What is it that you wanted to achieve? And ask them as well, what do they want to achieve? And something that we encourage people to do, especially these days, during COVID, is ask people as well. Don't just dive right into the tasks at hand that are work related. Check in with people, even if it's just for a few seconds, about how are you doing? How are you doing with, what's going on with our hybrid, coming back into the office, whatever it is. Check in with people a little bit more than we would have otherwise, because as we all know, there's more going on with people in the background than there used to be. And then finally, it's really good to make sure, again, instead of just diving right into the agenda of the conversation, make sure to check in with them if there is anything urgent they need to talk about as part of checking in with those feelings as well. We always do this with our clients, and we encourage you to do it too. The second thing, for the second slide here, the other things we want you to be thinking about in terms of structuring relationships more effectively is to kind of, on a regular basis, gut check the energy between the two of you within your team. How do people seem to be feeling? Are you all having a conversation that seems to be making people tense? Find out, and don't just, again, ignore what may be going on in the background, but bring that to the forefront and kind of do a gut check of how is everyone doing? And if there is something going on, you think there's kind of an undercurrent of something, figure out a way to talk to people about it openly and upfront, even if it's offline, privately, in a one-on-one conversation. If you need to have a conversation about something difficult or touchy, or give a coworker, for example, feedback that may be hard for them to hear, telling them in advance that you want to talk about or you need to talk about something that may be difficult for them to hear, or something that may be a little bit touchy, and asking them permission. So for example, saying, Joe, I've got something I need to chat with you about for a few minutes later this afternoon. And then when you hop on the phone with him later or in person or whatever, let him know up front, I need to talk to you about something that may be a little bit difficult, but it's important for us to work through. Is it okay if we chat about that right now? Asking permission can help get their buy-in and helps drop their defenses. Make sure that as part of every conversation, the third thing we want you to think about from this slide too, is make sure that you're asking enough questions too during the course of the conversation, and you're asking the other person for their feedback, input, for their opinion. And a lot of times we will actually recommend, when you're starting out a conversation with someone, to ask them to kind of dive in first, or ask them questions first. That again will get their buy-in and allow for the conversation to be kind of on a more level playing field, if you will. Then you can start to share your thoughts and ideas, okay? Let them know, for example, too, when you're designing this relationship with someone and discussing how you want to handle things, talk with them directly up front, ideally, about how they would prefer to receive feedback. So talk with them about, hey, if we've got something touchy that we need to discuss, or you're frustrated with something that I'm doing, have a quick conversation about how you can give each other feedback and what's the best way to do so, what's most comfortable for each of you. And then finally, make sure to, as you close out your meeting, your one-on-one conversation, et cetera, make sure that you each have your relevant action items that you need to take away to ensure that that relationship is going to stay on the right track. The second tool, coaching skill we want to talk about today is what we call the 3 levels of listening and coaching. And most of you have probably heard about active and effective listening, so we'll go a little bit quicker with this one. But we did want to point out these different 3 levels because it usually makes people think about this third level the most. Level 1 listening for all of us is basically listening to our own inner voice. What's going on with us? This sounds hard. I'm hungry. I am sick of this meeting, whatever is going on. And for a lot of us, we get caught in level 1 listening when we're, instead of really listening to the other person, we are thinking about the next thing that we want to say, or thinking about the next question we want to ask them, or thinking about the advice we want to give them. And it's really important as a coaching tool and skill to be more in levels 2 and 3 listening. Level 2 listening is what we call focus listening. It's listening to not just have the other person's words that they're saying, but also their nonverbals and any nuances in the conversation where it may be ebbing and flowing. Leaders need to be at this level and then add level 3 as well, because for example, if someone is saying yes to you about something, but you have this gut instinct that they really mean no and they're not into it, It's not a great idea to just blow past that and ignore it. It would be better to talk to them about it for a second. Like, I feel like you might be hesitating, or are you hesitating at all? Let's talk about it a little bit. So level 3 listening is listed on this next slide here. And that is global listening. And it's basically the energy between the two of you, what's going on in the room, so to speak, how it's changing. Has their attitude shifted towards you in some way? What's the mood or tone of the conversation? And the different ways that we can do this is to slow ourselves down a little bit. Go slow when we're having conversations, especially really important conversations with people. Don't just, race through it because we're uncomfortable. Don't step over something that someone has said that your gut is telling you, I think I need to bring that up, even though I don't want to. I think we need to talk about that. Slow them down if needed, and err on the side of asking more questions in some cases and in some conversations, rather than giving advice all the time, which is just kind of our human nature. We tend to want to help people out and give advice, but sometimes it's better to be quiet and let them figure things out on their own, or do a little bit more listening because they're about to give you a really good juicy nugget about what's coming next. And if we could do our third poll, that would be great. Oh, perfect timing. Thank you. So we're curious, based on these 3 levels of listening, how do you feel about your listening skills? And we want you to think about what we've just talked about versus what you may have known about before. We'll give you a minute to fill this out. That's great. So it's a little over half and half so far. We've got the majority of people saying yes, which is awesome. And on a consistent basis too. That's part of the question, not to make it too tricky. All right, I think we've got a good number participating. So let's go ahead and end the poll. We've got 76% of the people participated, and let me share the results. So 58% say they do have consistent good listening skills. That's fantastic for you all. That's awesome. For those of you, 42% who said no, thanks for being honest. I will admit, I have a teenager at home. I am not always the best listener because I feel like he's always talking, and sometimes I have to kind of tune things out. But listening to people, they know, people know when we're listening versus when we truly aren't. So it's really, really important, as much as we possibly can, to stay in this level 2 and 3 listening as much as we can as leaders. Our employees and our coworkers will know the difference, and that will help us create not just a greater sense of empathy, but that greater sense of trust between people as well. Let's talk about our third coaching skill, and this is the concept of guiding, not advising, which we've already talked about several times. But I wanted to introduce this very specific concept of what coaches call powerful questions. Powerful questions are questions that are just flat out curious questions, and that's it. And what I mean by that is that they're open-ended. They are not yes or no. There's no judgment in them. They're kind of more childlike, if you will. And it will allow your coworker, your employee, your supervisor, whatever, to kind of experiment a little bit more with their own answers. Powerful questions open up the relationship a little bit more and open up the conversation more, because they allow the other person and force them in a way, actually too, in a good way, to think a little bit more outside the box. The bottom line with powerful questions is that they are very open-ended, and they will not allow for a yes or no response. So for example, on the bottom of this slide, a powerful question could be, how can we work together more effectively, given that our work environment has changed, or now we're in these new roles, or whatever it is? What would you like to achieve with this project? You let them go first, then you share what you would like to achieve and make sure that it gels and meshes. What's another choice that you might be able to make here? So what you'll notice here, by the way, with powerful questions is not just that they're not yes or no responses, but they assume a positive outcome. And that's part of what I absolutely love about powerful questions as a coach. Our coaches use this all the time with clients. It makes them really think instead of just going to the next thing. You'll get more ideas out of people this way. You'll empower them to come up with their own answers, and they'll be more bought into the process, etc. And people will be able to think more creatively. Plus, because it assumes that that positive outcome, if you will, it forces them to think in a proactive, positive direction about a challenging, possibly challenging situation. As part of powerful questions, the way to kind of put this hat on, if you will, is to think about staying in a more curious space more often during the course of your conversations and during the course of your meetings. So powerful questions are not about offering judgment or an opinion, okay? We do know that obviously sometimes, and maybe a lot of the time, it's the right time to do that. You need to give them your opinion. But if you start to blend in these questions a little bit more than you would have otherwise, you'll start to see some really cool outcomes as a result. The other way to really just stay curious with people and be able to leverage powerful questions is to stay present with the other person and do the listening like we said, but also staying present within the conversation and not getting distracted by your phone, et cetera, or thinking about the next thing that needs to happen or what's going on. Obviously, you need to offer and bring up your opinion when it's appropriate. But part of establishing that greater trust and the reason for leveraging powerful questions is it shows that you're making an effort to understand their perspective. And the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be. This doesn't mean you have to adopt their perspective. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the person. And it doesn't mean that if you're in charge of making the final decision that you have to absolutely go with what they think. But understanding or making an effort to understand their perspective will go a long way in order to make them feel heard and developing that sense of trust. Now, let's talk next about the 4 needs of followers. I skipped over that last slide because we have a different way these days actually that we're providing our slides. So stay tuned at the end of the presentation. I will put, if you'd like a copy of our slides, I'll put that in the chat box in just a few minutes here as we move towards Q&A. This next slide here with the 4 needs of followers is a model that we love using with our clients. It is from the Gallup organization, which owns the StrengthsFinder assessment, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about before. The 4 needs of followers, they assert, are these listed on the slide. And what we mean, just by the way, or what they mean by followers, is basically anyone who's part of any type of group or organization. So this includes you, this includes your supervisor, it includes your coworkers, etc. And we all need this. If you think about you first, you'll realize that, yes, this is absolutely true. We all need a sense of trust within our organization, with our coworkers, with our boss. That there's going to be a policy, so to speak, at least within reason, of honesty, that we're respected at work, et cetera, et cetera. We all want that within our organization and within our groups. Second, we all want a sense of stability in our jobs, that things are going to be okay, that we've got support. Our boss has our back when we need it, our coworkers, et cetera. We all want to have at least a little bit of a sense of compassion, that people care about our well-being to a certain extent. And what we have found is that people care about this more and more these days as a result of COVID. The majority of our new clients coming to us are telling us that they want a sense of meaning out of their work more so than ever before. And they want to be able to work, remotely sometimes, et cetera, et cetera. And on the flip side of that, our clients are telling us that their employers are creating new jobs. Like one of our clients at AT&T, who is high up in HR there, they created a brand new department that's called employee engagement for them. And they're trying to revamp the whole culture of AT&T, huge organization. So these 4 needs of followers, they're even more important these days, I would say, due to COVID. So that sense of compassion. And then finally, the 4th need would be that we have a sense of hope, that we believe in our organization. We have a sense of direction, that we believe in the mission and in our supervisor, et cetera. We all, in an ideal world, would like to have these. So one of the things that you want to think about when you're working with your coworkers, when you're setting the agenda for meetings, when you're having just even a one-on-one conversation with someone, you want to think about, are your needs being met during that conversation and what's going on these days too within your organization, but are their needs being met as well? And what can you do as a leader, even if you are a coworker, like to help those needs be met for that person? Do you need to help develop a greater sense of trust between the two of you, for example, because that's breaking down for whatever reason? Do you need to give them a sense of a little bit more stability and hope because their project ended and now they don't know what's on the docket next for them, whatever it is? This four needs of followers as a very simple tool can really help you get to the heart of the matter with what may be going on with a relationship that is going well, but also one that may not be going as well, and how you can step into a greater leadership role by helping meet the needs of other people within your organization. The next tool we want to talk about as a leader, that is a very important coaching skill, is to be able to and do a better job of recognizing other people's strengths, the people on your team, your supervisor, but also people that work for you as well. So I guess what I want to say there is it's not just about whether you have employees or not, but really understanding and get a sense of what your teammates' strengths are too, as well as your supervisor, so that you can play to those strengths and leverage them. This, again, is another model from the Gallup organization and their Strengths Finder assessment. They call it the SIGN model for obvious reasons. And the way that you can know, we want you to start to think about what other people's strengths are on your team and notice when they are exhibiting these four items. So we'll talk through these just really quickly. So when the person seems to be really effective, kind of in the zone, they're rocking and rolling, they're being really successful, you need to think about not just, hey, good job, that's fantastic. You can talk with them for a second and help them identify what are those strengths that you're leveraging when you're doing so well there. Because the more they can identify and understand their strengths as well, the more successful but also effective they'll be too. When you notice that they seem to have an instinct for something, that they're always like raising their hand for a certain type of project or certain type of task, and they seem to actively look forward to something, that is another clue to what some of their strengths might be. When they feel like they're inquisitive, like they're focused, like they have more ideas, if you will, like they seem like they're kind of growing and changing and improving, that's a clue too that they're leveraging their strengths really effectively and kind of in the zone. And then finally, when you notice that they seem like they're really jazzed, they're excited, they seem fulfilled, etc., and like they've had a good time in a way working on that project or task or whatever it is, that is another clue to what their strengths are. So we talk about these because we want you as a leader, obviously, to understand what your own strengths are, and we're going to talk about those more in just a moment. But as a leader, it's really, really important as well to recognize other people's strengths, help point out what those are for them, help them understand what their own strengths are, and make sure that they're leveraging those strengths on a regular basis. Help them guide their career path, if you will, or their job towards those strengths. That's something that's really important to do as a leader as well as for yourself. And then finally, as we talk about your own unique leadership style, this is the last coaching skill we want you to talk about. We have one more tool here that we want to share with you too. But we want you to think about your leadership style as not just your ability to make good decisions, for example, or think quickly on your feet, or put a good team together, if you will. We want you to think about your leadership style as a conglomeration of multiple things. Your strengths, yes, absolutely, we've talked about those, but also your soft skills and your values. So what's important to you with your leadership position at your organization, and what's important to you, what's fulfilling and rewarding to you about your job currently, because your values are just going to naturally come out in any decision you make and how you lead your team and your coworkers. And finally, we also want you to think about your personality type too. So for example, are you really great at being creative, or are you better at being structured? Are you more introverted or extroverted? And how does that influence your leadership style? We really like the DISC assessment as well as the Strengths Finder assessment to understand a little bit more about what your strengths are and your personality type. But when you're thinking about your leadership style, again, don't just think about those hard skills, if you will, like I'm good at this type of software, et cetera, et cetera. Also think about those soft skills too. The last thing we want you to think about, and then we'll go ahead and get to Q&A here because it looks like we've got a lot of comments in the chat, which is fantastic, is we want you to think about, as you're developing and growing as a leader, these top 10 leadership skills that are outlined on this wheel. This wheel is from Development Dimensions International, which is a very highly regarded management consulting firm. These are the top 10 leadership skills they assert are important in today's economy, if you will. And a great thing to do is to print this out and do a quick self-assessment about where are you in each of these leadership strengths and skills. Where do you need to make some improvements, but what are your top 3 to 5 leadership strengths? Because that, again, is going to help you kind of paint the picture of who you are as a leader. Another thing we would highly recommend you do is have your boss fill this out for you as well. Even maybe consider having a trusted coworker fill it out so that you can get that objective perspective on how you are coming across as a leader, areas that you may need to change or adjust, but also where you really shine. And as we get to Q&A here and action steps, I'd like you to pop out your piece of paper or whatever is best for you to start writing down a couple of action steps that you will take from today. With your leadership style and strengths, we also want you to let people know as part of having these conversations with them that you're open to feedback along the way, and gathering feedback on a regular basis from your supervisors, coworkers, etc., will help you grow into the leader that you would like to be, and making sure that your perception of yourself is aligned with how you're actually coming across and how other people view you too. So let's talk next about action steps and start to move to our Q&A for today. Go ahead and take a few minutes to think about any questions that you might have, put them into either the chat box or the Q&A, because I am going to pop open both of those, okay? Here are some suggested action items that we would recommend: leadership wheel, the listening exercises, etc. I'm going to see if I can. Well, it's HallieCrawford.com. It's not like it's that hard. I don't know how to do this, Andy, how to copy and paste this. So I'm going to type it in here for everybody. I'll type in the way to get the slides, and then I'm going to look at the Q&A box first. And let's go ahead and dive into those, and I'll get this typed in just a moment. So one person asked, how can I, as a hiring manager, establish these proactive leadership practices right off the bat during the hiring process? Great question. I love that. What I would do is leverage first the designing the relationship kind of tool, if you will, or skill, and have a conversation with your new hire right up front about, what's kind of our agreement for working together? How often should we be meeting? What's your preferred method of communication and feedback? Have them talk with you about how they prefer their tasks to be organized, et cetera, et cetera. So start out, I would say, with this designing the relationship, that first step, and talking not just about, hey, these are all the things you need to know about and what you need to figure out for your brand new job, but talk also with them about how can we work together effectively, and being really direct about that with them, okay? Another question, oh wait, answer live. I think I already answered it. I'm just going to say I answered it live. Oh, okay. I got how to do it here. Thanks everybody. Patience with the technology. Okay. So starting from the top here, and Andy, let me know if I miss anything. So not as a supervisor, but managing project deliverables. Okay, good. That's perfect. You can never be too good at coaching your team members. Great comments. Thank you. let's see, managing hybrid and global teams, outside coaching leaders in various organizations. Okay, good. Here's another question too. What is the difference between coaching and mentoring? Coaching and mentoring tend to be very similar in a lot of ways. So what I would say best way to answer would be mentors. I would recommend use coaching skills for sure. But I think mentors in some ways, actually in a lot of ways, I should say, the difference in my mind at least is that mentors tend to be either within your organization or within your industry, and they're going to have very specific like industry advice maybe for your career direction, your career path, etc. So the lines are blurred between coaching and mentoring. I really do think that coaches should be mentors and kind of vice versa too. But from a technical perspective, a lot of times mentors will have more specific advice about your industry and your job. The recording will be available afterwards, just as a quick reminder. Psychological safety, which is more than trust, is something that someone mentioned, which I think is a really, really good point. This is where we talk about and go back to the 4 needs of followers. That psychological safety could probably fit into that sense of stability that we mentioned earlier. Okay. All right. Do you think giving advance notice about talking about the difficult topic later will create more anxiety leading up to the conversation? Fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. It can in certain situations. So what I would recommend, and I realize that this may have been a little bit unclear in my example earlier, it depends on the person that you're about to talk to. If you think it will create more anxiety or just cause more problems, I would wait until the moment that you guys are sitting down to have the conversation to then say, I'd like to talk about something that might be a little bit touchy. Is that okay with you? So instead of saying it in advance, like the day before or that morning, say it right then and there when you all sit down. It's a great point. Thank you for asking about that for clarification. What would you suggest if someone shuts down during the conversations? That's a great question. So if someone tends to shut down, this is where you can try to ask a powerful question and maybe even say, let's take a step back here and maybe pause for a moment. Is everything okay? Did I say something wrong that offended you, etc.? Do we need to talk about this later? I know that talking about touchy things is not always the easiest thing for people, and I realize that, but I would challenge you to try to do it in some way, shape, or form if possible. If you know that it's not going to go well and you're concerned about it, pull someone in from HR to be part of that part of that conversation. But I would actually take a step back and say, hey, can we pause for a second and talk about what's going on? Is everything okay? And it may be better to say, let's pause the conversation for now and we can talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. I do that with my teenager all the time, which I know is not the same thing. But if I just go after him and hound him about something, he's not going to open up to me. So I just let it be for a while and revisit the next day. That could be another approach. Okay. One other person says, these are great questions, everyone. Thank you. We have used the disc in our office before. Do you think it is an advantage or disadvantage when everyone is in the same quadrant? Oh, great question. I think it depends on what department you are in. So if you're in the department, for example, just kind of making this up because I don't have disc in front of me, but where you're in sales, let's say, and you all need to be pretty, high D dominant because you need to be comfortable reaching out to people, that could be okay. But in another type of department, it may be less ideal. What I do know and what I'll tell you, regardless of department, is that typically across the board, more diverse teams tend to be the ideal. That in an ideal world, you want to have more diverse teams because you're playing off of each other a little bit more. And then you've got lots of different strengths that you can play to or leverage on that team. It's a great question. Another question is, how long will it take me to improve my listening skills? That's a great one. Thank you for that. I think It's kind of the general rule of, it usually takes us about 90 days to develop a really good new habit, right? I don't think it can take that long with active listening, because I've seen people start to improve it like within a week. So one of the things that I would think about is give yourself like one or two of the active listening tools that you want to practice with and use. And I would say honestly that within about a month, your listening skills can improve enormously. It's just something you kind of have to absorb and needs to become part of you on a more regular basis. But the more you practice with the powerful questions and kind of sticking with the conversation, and instead of just always thinking about what you're going to say next, how do you feel? And therefore, how does the other person feel? The better you're off you're going to be. And then another question is, which is, or actually, yes, question and good comment. Thank you for this. What struck me is it's important for the leader to bring in her own authenticity, empathy, curiosity, vulnerability, and safe foundation in order for good coaching conversations to happen. Exactly. What do you think is the most important attribute to develop? Honestly, I would say oh gosh, it's so hard. The curiosity and safe foundation. And if I had to pick one, safe foundation first, then curiosity, because you can get curious with someone, but if they don't feel safe, they're not going to want to respond to you and not be authentic. So those would be the two. That's a great question there. Next question is, what do you recommend when your colleagues expect you to execute and implement actions instead of coaching? Do both. So I know that might sound like, gosh, how am I supposed to do that? But you can. Asking a quick, powerful question doesn't take much time. So what I have found kind of as a broad scope response to this question, which is a great one, is absolutely you have to execute and take action. So we're not saying not do that. But we usually are so far on the side of executing and taking action that even just a little bit of movement towards the listening and coaching is a really big deal and will help a lot. You're not going to fall all the way to the other side of it. So just start to sprinkle in some powerful questions a little bit more, to check in with people a little bit more frequently. Every once in a while, put it at the top of your agenda with people. And it doesn't mean that you can't take action or give advice at all. It's just starting to develop this coaching muscle, if you will, just like a muscle, when you go work out at the gym, you have to kind of strengthen this a little bit more and it will become old habit over time. Great question. All right, so Andy, I actually think we've answered all of the here's some more questions coming in. I've got to run in 1 minute. So let me see, let's answer one more question before we go. I did put just briefly this, if you would like a copy of the webinar slides, I put that in the chat box, everyone. So you have that. And please know if we don't get to your question today, because I've got to run after this last one, please feel free to email us at admin@halliecrawford.com. Happy to answer any questions. We'd be happy to do a free strategy session with you too. How can I practice these skills before I actually start managing people? Great question. Start to do them right now with your coworkers and your peers, and even in some cases, your supervisor. And that will help you develop those skills right away. Andy, is there anything that you would like to say before we close?
Yes, I mean, the main thing I want to say is thank you, Hallie, so much for sharing your expertise with us this afternoon. I know that I personally learned a lot, so thank you for joining us, and I'm sure that everyone learned so much. If